Islam.
Islam.
Three things we want to recognize today. Number one, because this is a powerful weekend. It's the Eid weekend, actually. Called Eid al-Adha, or Eid al-Kabir. This is one of this weekend, or tomorrow specifically, represents one of the two biggest celebrations in the Islamic world, right? The other one is Eid al-Fitr, which is, of course, after Ramadan. The importance of Eid al-Adha is called basically the Feast of Sacrifice. It's when Abraham was willing to sacrifice his own flesh and blood to Allah. He showed that much faith, if you will. And in that he was, of course, given something else to slaughter, lamb in three parts, and things of that nature. And so for that, and for Abraham's sacrifice, we honor that. In the lands ruled by the Moors, which is the Levant region, North Africa, and actually in Yemen as well, is known as Eid al-Kabir, or the Greater Eid. All right? Because this weekend represents the larger Eid, not necessarily al-Fitr. All right, Islam? All right. Let's get into it. Since we have guests, we're going to take it back a couple steps. We're going to cover the basics. Black and white. In our writings, in our keys, it says that black, according to science, is death. And when talking about white, it says white means purity, purity means God, and God is the ruler of the land. Now, in an organization of black folks, this seems very weird, seems strange. Why would we, with our skin tone, our shade, say that black, according to science, means death, while white can be purity, God, and ruler of the land? Now, when we think of black, especially in these days and times, we have the ideas that, that black is beautiful. The essence of all things come from darkness, triple darkness to the universe, what started all life and all the rest of the stuff. So black, and of course the black people came before white people. So white shouldn't be the pure one, black should be the pure one, right? Now, what's the problem with the statements that I made? If we talk about black is death and white is purity, God, and ruler of the land, in an organization of black people, what is the problem with the statement I made?
We're not black.
Thank you. We're not black people. All right. Now 102, as it says, key 86, it says, name some of the marks that were put upon the Moors of Northwest by the beast, quote, Satan, in 1774. That would be Negro, black, colored, and Ethiopian. 87. In all reality, what is a Negro? A Negro is a four-legged animal. Key 88. What is meant by the word black? Black, according to science, is death. Key 89. What does the word colored mean? Colored means anything that has been painted, stained, varnished, or dyed. Key 90. What does Ethiopia mean? Ethiopia means something divided. Can a man be a Negro, black, colored, or Ethiopian? The answer is no. Why? Because man is made in the image and after the likeness of God Allah. What title does Satan give himself? God. Will you define the word white? Of course, white means purity. Purity means God. And God is the ruler of the land. In the Holy Quran, chapter 47, Egypt, the capital empire dominion of Africa, in verse 3, it says specifically, then came the word Ethiopia, which means the demarcation of the dominion of Amexem, the first and true divine name of Africa. Ethiopia, let's do this. You already have black? Ethiopia. Now, where do we get the term Ethiopia? We have to define these terms to find out why these things were taken away from us. Ethiopia comes from a writer named Homer in a book called the Odyssey, or the Iliad. And it says, quote, Poseidon had gone to visit the Ethiopians worlds away. Ethiopians at the farthest limits of mankind, the people split in two. One part where the sun god sets and the part where the sun god rises. So, when you look at this, Homer is basically, and Homer's a European, he's defining who we are and splitting our map in two. He says basically that Ethiopia is on both sides of the map. So instead of a map looking like this, imagine it's split open and Ethiopia in the middle is on both sides. Why he defined it like this, I don't know. But we can't take someone else's definition of who we are and have him define us. All right? Any questions? All right.
What are you reading from?
That's from the Iliad, from Homer's Iliad.
I mean, you said is that where you took your first text from?
The first text, well, when that was from the Morse questionnaire.
Okay.
When I was doing the questions and answers, that's when you're talking about, yeah, the keys. That's my writings. That's from the writings of Prophet Noble Drew Ali, the Morse American questionnaire. Now, let's break down the word black. Black is said to come from a term Negro. Negro is said to come from the word Necro. And Necro in the Greek literally means what?
Yeah.
Death, right? Now, if you go to the online etymology dictionary, you look up black, it's a verb. It says to become black, to make black or darken. So if it's something that's made or became, that means it was one thing a certain way and it became something else. And that also goes into the idea of color. Now, black as a true descriptor in most European languages goes back to the word Blake or blacker or black. It doesn't go to the word Negro. So these are two different ideas. One is describing something that's burned, literally, and another one is the meaning of a person. So these are two different ideas of what the word black is. Right? Also, people say, well, what about the blackamoors? Because the blackamoors existed, XYZ. But the idea of the word blackamoor did not come into creation until it's like 1550, 1540s. This is after the rise and fall of the Moors in Spain. So remember, the Moors lasted in Spain from 711 to 1492. Now, less than 100 years later, this same group of people are called blackamoors, and then the idea goes from blackamoor to just black people. Right? In Moorish literature, what shall we call him? The quote is, the matter of the various names given to these 22 million people of all colors of every race in the globe was an act of European psychology. European psychology. They, the European, gave him, us, a name, then defined it as something inferior to theirs. White, they defined as a color of purity. Black, they say represents everything of evil, right? Now, let's define what European psychology means. Now, define European.
Somebody
From Europe, right? A European. We know what a European is, right? All right, cool, easy. Define psychology. It has 4 definitions. The first is the science of the mind or mental states and processes. So it's about how the mind works. Number 2, the science of human and animal behavior. Number 3, the sum or characteristics of the mental states and processes of a person or class of persons, or of the mental states and processes involved in the field of activity. And number 4, mental ploys or strategy. So we have a European-led mental ploys and strategy and their science of the mind and mental states. You can see how they are creating a specific thing, right? And we'll get to why in a second. Now, the Encyclopedic Psychic Dictionary defines psychological imprisonment as to function in a personality that is not one's own by right of decision. So you're doing something not based on your decision, but by somebody else's. To have been cornered or coerced into a specific set of beliefs and personality changes by mental suggestions without one's consent or knowledge. The victim is unable to make logical decisions contrary to the dogma or rules of the structure or the destructive code as their mentality suggests 24 hours a day. So basically they're barraged with this information of a person being something else, and it's not by their choice. Someone else is choosing this for them. Now it says the victim's mind is trapped and suppressed of previous concepts and knowledge by the will of another. One idea of that is the idea of, what we were told about slaves being broken. They said they were under 24-hour stress. Talk about not only women getting raped, men getting raped, babies stolen from their mothers, ex-wives. We've heard all the stories about how horrific, it was when you come off the boat and, everything just went haywire, especially by the European. Look at Roots, how they broke my man's name. Beat him long enough, he's going to start taking on somebody else's name. That was the same ideal, just in a visual sense. To keep reading, what shall we call them? It says, the Negro, quote unquote, as they were called in this nation, have no nation to which they might look with pride. Their history starts with the close of the Civil War, or more properly, with his being forced to serve someone else. Thus, he is separated from the illustrious history of his forefathers, who were the founders of the first civilization of the old world. Now, it says a Negro has no nation which they might look with pride. Now, a black person, you would say, where are you from? And the easiest answer is Africa, right? That's what you would get. That's why people from Africa. However, what is wrong with Africa?
Not a country.
It's not a country. It's a continent with 50-something countries in it. So you ask someone, and nationality is very important. So you ask them, well, what is your nationality? Where do you come from? Africa is a little too broad. That's like saying I'm from Asia. Asia, that's all over the place, right? So where could this person that's considered a Negro say his home is? Where did you come from before you were in slavery? That's the question. Like I said, if he's right, and it says that their history starts with the close of the Civil War, because that's when somebody else started defining you for you, and you got their title. Now your history starts where they said, right? It's that easy. So now, what we have is, like when we're looking at this picture here, you have an illustrious history, right? That you were totally separated from. You have no connection because somebody took something from you. You look at our timeline. Our timeline has a big fuzz around it when it comes to the slavery part, right? You say, if I say where you're from, you might say, Alabama or Arkansas or South Carolina, or where we from before that? Africa. And then we jump all the way back to Egypt somewhere. And all of us are from Egypt, all right? Which is not really possible. But, alright. Now, when it talks about what black is, if you let someone define you, it is a Negro. Now, we didn't get to color. We got to Negro, we didn't necessarily get to color. Color is something that has changed from one state to another, right? In alchemy, they call it the science of transmutation, things of that nature. Easy example is the chairs you're sitting in. They are black, and they are owned, right? We own these chairs, right? But you're wearing that, you're wearing black. Cold-blooded, right? So we're not necessarily against the color of black, we're against the descriptor of a people being black. Because once you accept this, you instantly accept being someone else's. Your own. You're taken from some state and changed into another state, which is like a chair. Now I can do whatever I want. Then I can go beat the chair up. I can take care of it. I can do what I want to. It's all about the mind state. Now we're talking about European psychology, and if they're working in mental ploys and tactics against a specific people, there's something about that, because now you have the Masons. They pop up, they're wearing their fez, right? And what do they have on their fez? Not only are they wearing their fez, which is one thing, they have something on their fez. It's bedazzled. What kind of words are on the fez, or on their fez? Morocco, Muslim.
Feds.
It's taking your history and they wearing it on their crown. Your headdresses and wearing it as theirs. They basically taken you out of who you were and sat themselves right in your skin. All right? Now, our people will say, well, what about Kemet? Kemet is, supposed to be called the black land, right? So if Kemet is the black land, it must mean that's because there's black people. So everything I said is wrong, because obviously Kemet, Tom Berry, and all the other ones are about black folks, right? All right, let's get to it. And this is a quote-unquote Egyptian writer. It says, the color black represents death and the afterlife to the ancient Egyptians. Asar was given the epithet the black one because he was king of the netherworld, and both he and Ampu, or Anubis, were portrayed with black faces. Now, Anubis is the dog, jet black, ear straight up, and Asar is said to be the black one. But it's not because he was black, it's because he represented death. He was the one that ushered people through the netherworld, right? Now, it says, however, the Egyptians also associated black with fertility and resurrection because much of their agriculture was dependent on the rich, dark silk deposited by the river banks by the Nile during the inundation. When used to represent resurrection, black and green were interchangeable because Asar wasn't black. Asar was actually green. Right? The black one is actually green. And as a result, Asar and Geb were depicted as black and green and emphasized their connection with fertility. Now we're talking about fertility of the land, we're talking about the netherworld. But what we're not talking about is skin tone, because none of our skin tones are black, right? Egypt was known as Kemet, the black land, and it is thought that this was a reference to the Nile Valley, not a description of ethnicity. It says Queen Atmos Nefertari was often depicted with black skin. I got you 1 second. While some have argued that this was a comment to the fact that she was of Nubian descent, it is equally likely that it is a symbolic of the fact that she was the patroness of the necropolis herself as well. She also represented death. This is
on another author, that Egyptian.
This is from ancientegyptiononline.co.uk. I can get you the actual link to it. Right. So even in certain ones that are writings, they understand it's the same thing. Black represented this. Now, death is not an enemy to man now. We're not talking some spooky monster stuff, but what we're talking about is the people that represented life so much, why are they now represented as death? Why is everything that they have and they are given, and why are they given this specific name? Why are they given this specific name by someone else who can define these terms for them? Because remember, you ain't God if you're not defining your own words. long as someone else is defining your words for you, they're God, because you're using their mind state to do everything, right? Now, any questions? Any vibrations? All right. Actually, let me go, while we're on that subject, let's skip over. There's a brother that wrote a book called Stolen Legacy. Greek Philosophy is Stolen Egyptian Philosophy by George G. M. James. In chapter 3, it's called Greek Philosophy is the Offspring of the Egyptian Mystery System. Section 4 is how the African continent gave its culture to the Western world. It says the Egyptian mysteries and the philosophical schools of Greece were closed by the edicts of Theodosius in the 4th century, which is the 300s ACE, and that of Justinian in the 6th century, or 529. So they had two waves in Europe of closing down education by the edicts of Theodosius and Justinian, right? And as a consequence, intellectual darkness spread all over Christian Europe and the Greco-Roman world for 10 centuries. So, when it talks about that, now we talking about from 300, and you add a century to that, it's around the 1300s, right? Who was running around in Europe at that time? 1300s, to bring them out of this darkness. Start with the end. What? That's the guys we're talking about. All right, that's what's up. As stated elsewhere, the Greeks showed no creative powers and were unable to improve upon the knowledge which they received from the Egyptians. Remember, Alexandria was sacked in Egypt, and it was given the name Alexandria. It was sacked. All the information was either burned or taken away to Europe. Greeks got a certain amount of this information. Certain other places got a certain amount of information. They started schools, university, Oxford, XYZ. But in Greece, they started using it for philosophy. And that's where the Greek philosophers came from, because they took from the stolen Egyptian information. Now it gets to a certain point where they can get to a certain point, but they can't get any further. And at this point, religion starts really taking over. Christendom starts taking over. And Christendom at that time was against intelligence. Let's be fair about it. You know, their whole thing was, you don't need to read, we'll teach you, we'll tell you what you need to know. You know, you don't need to do anything, just shut it down. So now, they're in intellectual darkness. And of course, this is, you know, within this time, we're also talking about the Crusades and things of that nature, when they finally got it, try to get it back going, but there's a lot that goes into that. All right, now, it's interesting that within this time, as Europe falls down, and they're in their second shutdown of information, a certain man was born. His name was Abdul al-Qasim Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn al-Muttalib ibn Hashim, or the Prophet Muhammad was born. 40 years later, he perfects this process called Islam, and it spreads all over the world, right? Or at least that part of the world. It spread really fast. What was the claim to fame within that process? It was thought, intelligence, verifying everything. It held people to a higher standard. So while the European world's darkening up, our process is still going. And of course, what happens now is that, you know, remember, 40 years, at 610, he started getting a revelation for the Quran, right? 100 years later, what happened? 610, 710, the Moors at their high point, boom, that's when they start taking over. All right? So, all right, I'll keep reading. It says, during the Persian, Greek, and Roman invasions, large numbers of Egyptians fled not only into the desert and mountain regions, but also to adjacent lands in Africa, Arabia, and Asia Minor, where they lived and secretly developed the teachings which belonged to their mystery system. In the 8th century AD, the Moors, i.e. the natives of Mauritania and North America, invaded Spain and took with them the Egyptian culture which they had preserved. Knowledge in the ancient days was centralized, i.e. it belonged to a common parent and system, i.e. the wisdom, teaching, or mystery systems of Egypt, which the Greeks used to call Sophia. So it talks about, of course, we talked about Alexandria, Egypt is getting slammed, because remember it was a major hub of information. It starts getting slammed, the people move away. They start moving in specific areas. Now those specific areas are also specific areas where our people came from the descendants of Abraham, where Joshua and them came from, right? And it says, as such, the people of North Africa were the neighbors of the Egyptians and became the custodians of Egyptian culture, which they spread through considerable portions of Africa, Asia Minor, and Europe. During their occupation of Spain, the Moors displayed with considerable credit the grandeur of African culture and civilization. Now, these are your people, your ancestors, right? The schools and libraries which they established became famous throughout the medieval world. Science and learning were cultivated and taught. Schools of Cordova, Toledo, Seville, and Saragossa attained such celebrity that they, like their Egyptian parent, attracted students from all parts of the Western world. And from them arose the famous African professors that the world has ever known in medicine, surgery, astronomy, and mathematics. But these people from North Africa did more than merely distinguish themselves in Spain. They were really the recognized custodians of African culture to whom the world looked for enlightenment. So, as Egypt comes down, information spreads out and it goes somewhere. Muhammad, this who's in Arabia, which is right next door, so I'm pretty sure they got information as well, perfects this process and it spreads to those same lands. Those two things created a situation where you have what's considered to be the Moors. All right? It says, in addition, the Moors kept constant contact with Mother Egypt, for they had established caliphates not only in Baghdad and in Cordova, but also Cairo and Egypt. Just here, it would be well to mention that the great leaders of the great religions of antiquity were initiates of the ancient mystery system, the Egyptian mystery system, from Moses, who was an Egyptian hierophant, down to Christ. So now they're saying that the prophets, to some degree, were part and parcel of this mystery system, right? Because remember, everybody constantly went through Egypt in the Bible. At a certain point, things got low, where did they go? Into Egypt. Came back out, did some other stuff, things got low again, where did they go? Right back in Egypt. They had to pick up something at this point in time. And what he's saying, what George G. M. James is saying, is that the Egyptian mysteries is the mysteries of the Bible as well. Right? One of the things that we do is we set the seeds, right? I specifically run this measure out because I know somebody who's never been here before. And I just need them to hit them. To say, why is that? That doesn't make sense. Or does it make sense? It seems kind of weird. So there's a science to everything we do. When we talk about, now we're going to talk about slavery. That was the next part. The thing that we want to establish is that if the prophet wrote these things, because sooner or later somebody's going to read these things and get highly offended. Everybody does. That is the gate right here. This is the first gatekeeper right here, the black and white issue. To allow someone, and like I said before, to allow someone the power to define you already did pretty much. The minute you let somebody define you for who you are, take your history and put themselves in there and define themselves as such. We never question why white people are white. We never really question why black people are black. It's something that just is. They've been white forever. They look white to me. Do they really? Do you really look black? But I agree, though. Well, you get a million points, I agree with each and every one of them. Now, one of the things that they say is that we are descendants of slaves. It's another big thing. We talk about slavery. Just like any of the other words, these words are very specific words with very specific meanings. Now, the prophet said, in the divine warning of the prophet for the nations, it said, it is a sin for any group of people to cling to the names and principles that allude to slavery. Easy, right? It says, I, the prophet, was prepared by the great God Allah to warn my people to repent from their sinful ways and go back to the state of mind that our forefathers, to our forefathers' divine and national principles. Now you have the idea, twice he mentioned the word sin, especially when it comes to us not going back to the state of our forefathers, because it's very important. Anyone you know with a national identity, they have no problem telling you who their forefathers were and what their forefathers stood for, and those are the same things they stood for. When Conor McGregor so lovely got beat up by Floyd Mayweather, the Irish people let you know 100% that they were Irish, to the point that non-Irish Europeans were adopting Irish identity just for this idea. That's important. Tariq Nasheed, he brought up a specific thing. His idea was that it was not Conor McGregor versus Mayweather. It was the Irish versus Mayweather. That's the ideal that they had, and that's the ideal that they move with. Not saying it's right or wrong, but that's national identity. That's no matter what they had before with them, the minute Irish against him came about, they all became Irish. Those are the ties that bind with them. That's an important thing. Now, do we have that same tie?
No.
It goes in the conversation we had earlier about our youth and things like that. It's the same ideal. Now, when we go into the word sin, same thing. What does sin mean? Sin means to transgress. And what does transgress means? To step out of bounds. You know, the Moral Science Temple of America is all about staying within a certain bounds. It's a specific path within a specific bounds. And when you step out of that bounds, you're in the idea of sin, right? Because that's a transgression of law, and law governs all events, right? The easiest breakdown of why we are not and never have been slaves, because slave comes from the word Slav. Now, who's a Slav? Slav is a certain group of Europeans, right? It's amazing how all of a sudden we're still being named after somebody else, right? During the 8th and 9th century of the Fatimid Caliphate, the Islamic Caliphate, obviously, most of these enslaved were Europeans captured during the wars and during European coastlines. They used a word called Sakaliba. And these refer to specific Slavic slaves, because the Slavs were continuously being made slaves by many nations, kidnapped from the coast of Europe in wars, as well as mercenaries in the medieval Arab world. Now, basically what the Muslims were doing was taking European slaves and using them as pawns in their war. They would, you know, the bullet catchers as we call them nowadays, right? The Moors cannot and will not ever be slaves because we are not these people. It's all about national identity. And when that national identity, the minute you claim to be somebody else, you're stepping out of bounds at that point. Because you're not German. If you start being German, everybody's looking at you like, really, dog? You know what I mean? So it's a whole different situation. Now, to be black is to literally be a slave. It's the same thing. It's something that's owned by somebody else. Define what it is and used for its own purposes. Our people are put in the same exact situation, or have allowed ourselves to put in the same situation. Because to tell you the truth, Europeans really don't have to put a boot on our neck anymore. We do it on our own. We accept these things and we move on. We try to take death in this ideal and make it a pretty thing. You know, it's out of, you know, words I can use but I can't, but you know, lipstick on the pig, let's put it that way. You know, we try to take something that's nasty or negative in a certain context and dress it up and make it beautiful, afros and stuff. I love that time. That was a part of my growth as well. But it got to a certain point where that just wasn't it. There's something else. And that something else is national identity. All right? Now, I keep using a certain term over and over again. that word, you know, in our keys, key 13, it asks, what is your nationality? Moorish American. Key 14, why are we Moorish American? Because we are the descendants of Moroccans and born in America. Now, Divine Constitution and Bylaws Act 6, it says that the Moorish Americans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites, whom inhabited northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa. Specifically, this area and this area, because this part of Africa, getting that whole thing as well. In the Holy Quran, chapter 45, verse 2, Islam what? It says the key of civilization is in the hands of the Asiatic nations, the Moorish, who were the ancient Moabites and the founders of the holy city of Mecca. Right? Key 61 asks a specific question. Who was guarding the holy city of Mecca to keep the unbelievers away? Angels. Key 62. What is the modern name of these angels? Arabia. What is the shade of their skin? Allah. Are the Moorish Americans any relation to these angels? Yes, we have the same father and mother. Now, you talk about Moor or Moorish American, you're tying yourself back to something very specific. You're tying yourself to a people that's very specific. Now, you say, well, who are these people? There's two ideals. There's two prevalent ideals with our people. Number one is that we were brought here in slavery, right? And the other ideal, we were already here before Columbus. Our people were already here, right? Who are those people? And if you could say, all right, well, you say Moor, you say Moroccan. Well, Morocco is a little small country on the very tip of Northwest Africa, right? How could you call yourself a Moorish American and you prove without a doubt that your people are from this little country in Northwest Africa? That's not the ideal, because one thing you're looking at Morocco is a kingdom, right? It's a country, a kingdom, it's an empire as well. So the lands that it influenced, the land that it ran, were under its influence as well. Let me give you a hint. And an ideal of this. And this is something Brother Khaled popped up, showed, but we're gonna keep going. It says, make sure, okay. It says the industrious acts of the Muslims, the Northwest and Southwest Africa. It says, these are the Moabites, Hamathites, Canaanites who were driven out the land of Canaan by Joshua and received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle in that portion of Egypt. Later years, they formed themselves as kingdoms. These kingdoms are called, this day, Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, etc. Now, the important part of that is that it's saying that those lands of the Maghreb were Egypt, but we think Egypt is just this spot here. It's saying that all this was Egypt. How do we square that up? Because you have kingdoms, you have empires. Empire covers more than one kingdom, right? Covers an area. What were the area of the Moors when they were at their strongest? Or in the last, before they fell?
All of this thing.
Pretty much all of this right here, right? This and area here. So it's more likely that you are Moorish American above anything else. Also, Moorish American is a political ideal as well. So any Asiatic can actually be part and parcel of Moorish Americans as a political ideal, not necessarily as a bloodline ideal. Two separate things. Remember, it's a divine and national movement. There's a specific walk you have to walk. There's a political identity. There's a national identity. And all these things have to all coexist at one time. You got a question? This one.
Islam, I rise, giving the highest of praise to the Prophet, to Allah, and the highest of honors to his noble and divine prophet,
Indeed.
I wanted you to distinguish between Moorish American and a new term, or rather new term, African American, where those two things, where they delineate in and how they may be different or whatnot. In response to us, in our claiming in being those two things.
So can we be a Moorish American and African American at the same time? Is that what we're looking at?
Not necessarily. I was just saying, what would it be to be? What is different between us being African American versus Moorish American, and how do we wear those two hats or whatnot?
You asked about Moor and African American, right? It's not. Now, we're taught that the Moors, Moorish Americans are descendants of the ancient Moabites, right? Whom inhabited northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa. It also says the inhabitants of Africa are the descendants of the Canaanites from the land of Canaan, the Moabites from the land of Moab, who received permission from pharaohs of Egypt to settle and inhabit northwestern Africa. They were the founders and are the true possessors of the present Moroccan Empire, with their Canaanite, Hittite, and Amorite brethren who sojourned from the land of Canaan, seeking new homes. Their dominion and inhabitation extended from northeast and southwest Africa across the Great Atlantis, even unto the present North, South, and Central America, and also Mexico and the Atlantis Islands, before the great earthquake which caused the Great Atlantic Ocean. Now, Moor comes from the word Moab. Now we know the word Moab means of the Father. What's so important is that when you read the creation and fall of man, because we talked about this last week, it talks about man being the Lord of the plane of manifest. And of course that word Lord also goes back to the word Moor as well. So we're saying that we are literally the child of God. That's who we're stating. That's a bold statement to make. You went from being a Negro to claiming yourself as direct descendants of Allah. It's very important. That's a very big step. And now, what we have to do? We got to show and prove, right?
That's right. Action.
Right? Now, African American, as we said before, Africa and America, two continents. You can't be of two continents.
Demonstrate, Sheik.
That's why this is a false flag. And then the whole Jesse Jackson thing and all that kind of stuff. We don't want to go through too much of that. But what we're doing is we're basically taking ourselves here and putting ourselves here. Now, this doesn't mean that we are white people.
That's right.
We ain't white folks. There's no such thing as white folks. We ain't white folks, we ain't Europeans, we ain't none of that stuff.
That's right.
However, this definition can apply to them because we're taking it back. We're talking about purity, God, and the ruler of the land. Now, that is also a prophecy of some sort that we're looking to fulfill. Because that's a big statement as well, to be the ruler of the land. Right now, in all of our lifetime, we know, we ain't been the ruler of the land. Somebody else has been ruler of the land, right? So you have to put yourself, so basically what we're doing is we putting our big boy pants on, and we sticking ourselves back and putting ourselves back to a certain status, for lack of a better term. And that's why we reject titles that delude to slavery, i.e. being black, or titles that someone else gives to being God, because they can't be God. Now, when it says who made you, what's the answer?
Allah.
Now, it says that the devil was created. Now, who created the devil? Elohim, right? Now, there's one group that is of God. There's another group by the seven eyes, right? Now, that thing isn't made by Allah. It's not of Allah, right? So it can't be God. Another thing is that what is the one thing that the devil wants to do? It wants to be like God, right? And what does that mean? You create something.
You can't be something if you're going to be like something.
Right? Nah, yeah. But if there's a devil, they call him Satan, right? If that thing wants to create, what is it created? What is its best creation, its most powerful creation? It's taken the sons of God and daughters of God and turn them into four-legged beasts. That is a creation. Negro's a thing. It's a thing, right? That is what the devil has done. And then he's put himself, because remember it says, what does the devil sometimes call himself? All right?
Wow.
Any questions? Islam. I like to leave because I came in peace.
Yeah.